Welcome to the second episode of the 10 Coins podcast. Today is going to be a very interesting episode because we do have a special guest today. So, without further ado, I'll introduce the guest we have today. So, today is going to be a very special episode. I won't spoil what's in it yet, but you'll figure out probably by who is in this. First of all, I want to introduce the first guest, the YouTube king himself, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. JP Givener.
Yes, sir! What's cracking, everybody? Back for another one. You know the vibes. We're here for a good time. And we're going to make it a good one. You know the vibes. Let's go.
Yes, sir. Oh, by the way, I do have a small announcement. We do have a YouTube channel as well. So be sure to check that out, guys. I'll drop the link in my channel. And make sure to sub to it if you're interested. Here's the first video we have. Let's spam that bitch up in here. Be sure to subscribe, guys. All the podcasts will be stored on that YouTube channel. Every single one.
Voila.
And there's gonna be plenty in the future.
Yep, we're just kicking it off.
So go blow it up. But John and I aren't here alone today because we do have a special guest. Today is gonna be a lounge episode. So I would like to introduce the man behind the scenes. Because he doesn't get enough credit, honestly. There's a reason why we have the lounge website, why it's running, and why the bots are up to date and such. And the new MKC website too. He does so much work behind the scenes, man. Give a warm welcome to Fike.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me on, and apologize if I have any microphone issues. Been struggling with that recently, but
You sound
my name's
just fine.
Vike. That's good. Yeah, my name's Vike. I'm one of the Australians in the community, and do the development for the MKC Lounge website, and yeah, happy to be here.
You know it, man.
Nice. So, let's just get into it. I'm very excited for season 9, obviously. I think all of us are. And what are some things you would like to see in season 9, John?
It's kind of hard to tell right now. I mean, obviously there's the new queue system, which I'm sure we're going to talk about soon enough, but I mean, I reckon that's probably a few months down the line, which makes sense. It's going to be a huge change. And we'll talk more about that in the future, of course. I guess in terms of what could happen, like, for next season, that's, like, definitely feasible. I mean, I think Lounge, for what it has right now, is pretty much perfect. Like, it's you can can up at most times of the day. If you're in the lower tiers, you can can up at pretty much any time in the day. And, there's squad queues to compensate for, like, let's say, like, the Americans, like, in the higher tiers who can't play at, say, like, 5 p.m. Eastern time. Those are great. I think there are two things that I'd really like to see. The first one being, I think more squad queues, which we're already seeing right now. I think 3 a day is already pretty great, especially since we're starting to, like, appeal to every time zone. So, for example, like, May 9th, this past Tuesday, we had one at 10 a.m. Eastern. So that appeals definitely more so to, like, the European and Japanese players, and some of the Americans who wake up early. And then 2 p.m. is definitely more so catered towards the Americans. Although I think Lounge is pretty active around this time anyways, across the board. I think a better example would be, like, when it's at 5 p.m. I think that's a perfect time for the Americans who may not get so lucky in the later times. And then, like, this on Tuesday, 11 p.m. So that definitely cares more so towards, like, the Americans who stay up, who would, like, stay up, like, slightly later, and then also the Japanese players. So I think 3 per day minimum is already a great start. If there's any way we can get, like, 4 in there or even 5, just to, like, make sure that every person in every such possible scenario gets an opportunity to play, I think that'd be, like, probably the best case scenario. But I mean, I'm sure that there's stuff that goes on behind the scenes that, like, maybe there's a reason why we couldn't get, like, squad queues, like multiple squad queues a day, like all the time. But I mean, hey, either way, if that could happen,
I feel
that'd
like
be really
part
cool.
of that is because they don't want to interfere with the regular tier activity. I think 3 a day
Oh,
is
for sure.
perfect for that reason because you're accommodating like every time zone. Like you have the Japanese time zone, the Europeans, and the Americans, and those are just 3 different big time zones of like a large chunk of players. But I think
Yeah, 100%.
if you increase the frequency of squad queue events, then regular tier activity is going to suffer because people would rather play in the squad queue from time to time. But the core lounge, I think, it should still be cared after.
Well, this is my analysis on that. I think the main reason why I mentioned this whole thing of like maybe increasing the frequency is because, I mean, in my example of Tuesday, you know, I mentioned how 2 p.m. Eastern time, lounge is still generally pretty active around that time across like all tiers where anyone can play. I mean, there wasn't one at say like 5 p.m. on last Tuesday, and that's gonna be a pretty big gap for like the American people. They won't be able to play for like quite some time. They wouldn't be able to play until probably like 11 p.m. at least in
Yeah.
the higher tiers until that time. I would say realistically, like if we're not going to increase the frequency, I think that just like securing that like or like just ensuring that every time zone has like some priority in the squad queue times, and I think that can be done easily by like you know the nailing the 5 p.m. time.
see
I
what
think that's a
you're
really
trying
good
to
time for
say.
the Americans.
You kind of want to add squad queues in like the dead times. So
Yeah,
the
exactly.
activity doesn't die out. Like the tiers are done playing and then there should be a squad queue after that.
100%. And I think to add on to that as well, most of the time, you know, and I would say this mainly happens at night. I haven't really measured too much data on this, like for right after, say, like a 5 p.m. Eastern time squad queue. But generally speaking, once people are done the squad queue, you know, a lot of people are playing the game in that moment. They're hungry to play another one, you know, if they're down for that.
Yeah, that
So it's
usually
like,
happens. After a squad queue is done, then people will can up in tier A or something afterwards, if it's around that time.
yeah. Yeah, so I guess the overall point is like, I almost feel like 4-a-day could be the sweet spot because then, you know, now that we're talking about overall activity, yeah, the more squad queues you add in, the more like you take away from the general lounge activity. But at the same time, you could just simply revive lounge activity if you have a squad queue every day at a time where lounge is generally dead.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what the best thing would do. So you have the regular tiers and they play at that times, and then maybe if lounge staff could figure out when the dead zones are, and then plan squad queues for those times. I think that would be best.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, I like those ideas as well. I think from my perspective, as like I don't have a lot of time personally to play the game recently with a lot of the stuff that I've been working on. So, you know, I don't have as much experience with the dead times or that, and also being in Australia, like it's generally active when Japan's active because we have very similar time zones. But yeah, no, I think having more squad queues and those kind of dead times would help a lot. But also, down the line with Cinder's proposal for a new lounge matchmaking kind of approach would help too.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Now, I did
I
mention
think
I had
also like
best.
I did mention I have two like ideas that I think would be awesome for next season. The additional squad queues or just like squad queues every day at like the dead times would be great. My second suggestion, I mean, look, maybe this is just a me thing because I'm not the biggest fan of the fact of I know there's a rule for this, but like I'm not the biggest fan of like after like the Frank code is posted that you only have 5 minutes to join the room. I understand why it's like this instead of like 10 minutes. And I think there is a rule where it's like the late penalty only applies if you're like 7 minutes late. But I mean, I've been penalized for being like just over 5 minutes late before, which is really, really frustrating because like, let's say, lounge finishes, a bit earlier than I expected, and I'm like, you say I'm getting my tea ready because, my voice is messed up and I want to get my voice better. But then like once lounge gathers, like I'm still in the middle of like boiling the water.
Yeah.
And then like, let's say we get 2v2 right away. And then someone frame one sends their friend code and says up. And then let's say he's in a bad mood that day and he's like, you know what? No, we need to get going right away. I don't care what anyone says. If you're like 2 seconds after, 5 minutes after opening the room, you're getting that penalty. And then I'm over here making sure everything's all good. I want to sip on my tea before I record my video. So I want to take a bit more time before joining the room. And then I get in the room and that like my me shows up 5 minutes after the room goes up. And then bro's like, nope, you get that penalty. Now, look, I understand that generally speaking, people, are nice about it. 7 minutes, if someone sends their code and up right away. I honestly do think though that 7 minutes could be just better in general, because then, it's still less than 10 minutes, which I think was already like partially fair to begin with.
Yeah.
But I can understand why people would be like, okay, let's just get this going. I personally think 5 minutes is just like a little too quick, but maybe that's just me. It could very well just be me, to be completely honest, but I feel like because there is the rule where it's like 7 minutes if the host just sends their friend code and it's up right away. I feel like 7 minutes in general to join the room would be completely fair. It's not too much longer than the 5 minutes, and it's not too long like for like the 10 minutes per se. I went off on a tangent there, but you get the idea.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I understand.
I get the idea.
I think it was changed in the past because I think certain players in high tiers abused it very often. Like, they would always just join at like minute 10 or later, and nobody likes waiting that long. I personally think 5 is fine, because if I want to play lounge and such, like, I make sure I'm like ready. When I type my can, I'm like sitting in front of like everything. Like, my computer's already booted up. I'm ready to stream. And I'm ready to play the game pretty much in that setting.
100%.
And
Yeah.
I'm just sitting there, like, waiting to play. I personally think it's fine. I guess if we were to talk about complaints about lounge, one of my biggest complaints is that in the higher tiers, if a team trolls or like throws the match, or they just don't try anymore, I think it doesn't get punished like heavily enough, because of
pretty valid.
the things that are catered to the lower tier players, and it kind of cripples the high tier players. Because let me explain this to you. You can be like a tier F player, and you can be like Toadette on like the Koopa Clown, for example, right? Because you like
Yeah.
that combo and you're not really taking the game too seriously. But if a really good player were to use the same combo, he's definitely just throwing on purpose.
For sure.
Because everybody in tier A takes the game seriously. But because there's a conflict in the rule set, because you're allowed to use whatever you would like, pretty much, it won't get punished for that reason. But I think to make the lounge more competitive in a higher, like, caliber, in tier A and such, I think that maybe that could be revisited. And that's really the only thing that I think could be improved about lounge, and like a small thing that's kind of annoying, I guess.
I think to extend on that point, it's like there's also, what if you're someone who is mainly an outward player, but you want to try out inward? Like, there's no avenue today for you to be able to like drop down to a lower tier to represent your inward skill level. Like, you're kind of forced to lock into a certain style of play. I know this isn't exactly what you're saying, but it is kind of difficult. You're kind of forced to compete at this top level, regardless of whatever you're wanting to try out. I mean, I know these combos you're saying are like kind of troll combos, so that's obviously someone trying to throw. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting like problem. I'm not too familiar with, I guess, the how often this kind of thing occurs. I mean, I've heard it happens a lot, but yeah, we definitely need to figure out what's happening there.
It happens a lot in the higher tier rooms solely for that reason, because they know they can get away with it. And the system that MKW has is that there's only like a few viable cards. I personally think that would be okay to like enforce in the higher tier rooms, because the example you mentioned of somebody wanting to try out inward, that never happens. Usually the person goes inward because they are either losing, like they give up, or they just don't like their teammate in some cases. They never want to do it to try it out. They want to use it for like a harmful intent, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, exactly.
I have an
Exactly.
idea.
I'm saying that as well.
I have an idea for how every party in this scenario can win. So I think I definitely agree with the concept of, maybe you have to use like a certain, like you only have access to a certain amount of like combo parts, something like that, or it's like if you're very clearly trolling, and you know your team is not doing as well as a result or has no chance of coming back as a result, then I could totally understand that being worthy of being penalized. But I think to compensate for the people who actually do want to try certain things out, like Vike was mentioning, I know this has happened before. I know this isn't like squad queue, like in the nature of squad queue, but this has happened before for, when the DLC would release like the unranked squad queues. But there were DLC free-for-alls. Me personally, I would not be against having free-for-alls as quote-unquote squad queues.
So like
moving
unranked
forward.
squad queues.
Not necessarily. I mean like just putting in free-for-all in squad queue.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean.
Yeah, like it's not squad queue by nature, but it's still an organized free-for-all. And, then people, will be on their own, every man for themselves. And regardless of people's opinions, like on the format, it's still an opportunity for them to do like whatever they want. And, really, I guess, test what they're made of, because FFA isn't the most common format in Lounge, naturally. And in the context of, people wanting to use whatever they want, in free-for-all, you're not hurting anyone but yourself by using, say, an unviable combo, or if you want to try something new. You're not hurting anyone else. So if that opportunity is there for people, then that maybe could mitigate the possibility of that problem arising in like tier A, for example. I'm not sure how much it would do, but it would still provide the opportunity for people to, I guess, just be able to use whatever they want without hurting anyone in the process.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure about that.
I guess the big question is, though, it's like, how often would you run free-for-all, quote-unquote, squad queue? Because, I mean, the point of squad queue is to be able to play with who you want.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're only playing on your own, it kind of defeats the purpose of squad queue, even though free-for-all, it isn't picked that often, so it's still an opportunity to play it. But it's like, I feel like just for the nature of squad queue, you'd only be able to put it in like maybe once, twice, 3 times at best a week, something like that.
Yeah, maybe
if that
as
were to be
often as
something implemented.
66.
I like that. Yeah, because there were 4 6v6s this week. And I mean, makes sense. There's more squad queue events naturally, but it's not in the spotlight. Obviously, there's more 2v2s, more 3v3s. There's one 4v4 as well. I mean, 4v4 is definitely... I think 4v4 is probably the most controversial format. Just because if you get second, you gain nothing. Pretty much. Like, it's pretty brutal. At least with 6v6, it's like, you either win this amount or you lose this amount. There's no in-between something like that unless you tie. With 4v4, it's like, you have to win or else you're getting nothing or you're losing a bunch. So I can understand why 4v4 is only there like once.
Yeah,
Makes
that's why
sense
I
to me.
hate 4v4 as well. And usually the Mogi is decided after race 5. You already know how it's gonna pan out.
Exactly. Another thing too with free-for-all, I know that in terms of MMR, and I guess because, people are way more reckless in free-for-all because they don't have to worry about hitting someone else. Naturally though, like I can understand why people wouldn't like free-for-all because like the points are so close and people are very reckless, but it is very engaging in the sense that generally free-for-alls are very close. At least for like the majority of like the free-for-all. Like I've had instances where it's like a lot of free-for-alls I've played in, it's like 3rd through 9th would be like within like a 10-point range, something like that. And then 1st and 2nd would be like barely ahead as well. And so I feel like it's very engaging. And if you're trying to win, you have to be, like on your A game. You got to make sure you're not getting hit too much. You got to make sure you're not just completely losing it. But I also understand the sense that like, it's very reckless. It can be very close with MMR on the line. I understand why people don't pick it. It makes sense. It's my favorite format, but I understand why it's not picked that often. So in the context of squad queue, if it were to be implemented, I think as often as 66 is probably like the best way to do it.
Yeah, I like the idea of FFA squad queues. And I think kind of in general, there's a lot of requests for other types of squad queues as well, like, kind of gimmicks of, DLC only, that kind of thing.
Mm.
Oh, sorry, did my audio just change, by the way? I think my mic disconnected.
You sound a little quieter, but you still sound clear.
Yeah.
I think so. Give me one moment. You keep talking. I was going to sort something out. I think my mic changed.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you what. That actually sounds really cool for like the gimmicks. Like if we were ever to do like say like any like just booster course pass.
Yeah, we brought that
squad
up the
queues
last
or
podcast, right? Like unranked,
Yeah.
Unranked DLC only events. I feel like that could be interesting, or like a banned track list, but it's like unranked, so it doesn't interfere
Yeah!
with main lounge. And the people
I
who
was
would want to
just
play it
gonna
for
mention
fun
that.
would still play.
Rookie made a really good video about this concept, and like you can make it so like, and this was obviously in the context of like the new queue system, but if you were talking specifically for squad queue, you could have certain things like, say random tracks just to throw something out there. It's those kind of ideas that could really make lounge more innovative for the time being, at least until we get this new queue system sorted.
Yeah.
And I think it would definitely add to like the interest in lounge, and and lounge would just keep growing as a result. I mean, I'll tell you what, from my own experience, like I have quite a few IRL friends who I've introduced to lounge, and we have a really good time when like they're playing, I'm watching, I'm telling them you should probably use your item like here, there, whatever the case is. It's really fun, which sounds weird to say because generally, like if you don't play Mario Kart that often and you're not a seasoned veteran, lounge isn't really like that welcoming, at least in terms of like being able to play at a certain level. Because like even in like tier G, for example, you could still get like one player doing freaking motion glider on Mario Kart Stadium, or multiple people.
Yeah, some people
Like, it
actually
was
know
nuts.
how to do it. It's funny.
Yeah, it's nuts. I don't know if actually, you know what? Okay, I don't know how this could be implemented, but I have a really cool idea to maybe make this more competitive scene. This probably would not work at all, but I'm just gonna throw it out there. What if there was like a separate lounge, like separate from like the 150 lounge, or like a separate system, I guess, where it's like for brand new players who've like never played the game before. You wouldn't be able to track like if they actually have or not. It's almost like placement in a sense, but like you
feel
can
like-
kind of like gauge where you are, and like especially if you're like just starting out, and it would make things more interesting for like the newer players, but at the same time worldwides are also right there.
I feel like that would kind of divide the community up a bit, though.
Oh, for
because
sure.
I think you
For
would
sure.
want to introduce the placement players to like what lounge actually is, playing with existing players
Facts.
already. Like most video games do it like that. Like let's say if you play League
Yeah, for
of
sure.
Legends, you have a couple placement games, and you just play ranked mode, and then you get placed based off how good you do. And then to keep your rank, which is very interesting, you have to play a couple placement games too. So let's say you rank up to like gold 5 in League, you would have to play 1 or 2 matches to prove that you actually deserve it. And
Yeah.
I think if Lounge gets bigger on like an even bigger scale, that could definitely happen in this game too. And I think it'd be a good system, and to kind of like prevent people from being in tiers that they shouldn't even see. Like, let's say somebody gets a lucky streak and he ranks up, then he has to prove that he belongs in that tier by playing like 1 or
Yeah.
2 games before actually ranking up in that sense.
A really interesting one.
Yeah.
I guess the
Um,
reason why I brought that up to begin with is because, I mean, at least for my IRL friends, they got schooled pretty hard in tier G. I don't know how feasible this is. I mean, how many people are at like 0 MMR? I haven't checked this before the stream, but like, I guess just in general, like if there's any way to make lounge, I guess, more beginner friendly, which I mean, maybe the only way to do that is by like, I guess, adding in more tiers or ranks. I don't even know what you do
240.
there.
Tier H next season, baby.
Yep, there we go. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, because I mean, I feel like there's a lot of people who could be very well interested in lounge, but because even as low as tier G, maybe they're still outclassed and they don't feel welcomed, at least in terms of their ability. Yes, worldwides are right there. Yes, time trials are right there, but I don't know if there'd be any way to make the full-on beginners make it more accessible for them. I don't think it's possible, but if it is, that'd be really cool.
This is kind of where like kind of understanding the mathematics of like how the MMR is distributed helps a lot, because when you got people joining and the average MMR of the people joining is 1,000, then that means that the average MMR per player across the whole lounge decreases because you're going to be like adding more people who are at low MMR. And what generally happens is because they're not very skilled at the beginning, that MMR kind of gets transferred to the players above them as they like, so like you're going to lose your first match, it's going to get handed off to other people. That's kind of, when if you look at the total of the MMR changes from a match, it always adds up to 0. So whatever's lost is gained by someone else.
Right.
And so that's kind of where a lot of the season resets is important. We kind of like look at how much of that MMR has been dragged down to low, so that like there's this huge skill gap inside these lower tiers, and then you like boost everyone's MMR, bring up the average, so that it gives a chance for it to be distributed. Because when you've got such a big skill gap in those low tiers, it's impossible to gain any MMR because just everyone else is like there's this huge gap. So that's what we try and fix there. But there's kind of a second thing as well, which is that the algorithm we use is it's called the ELO algorithm. It's like exactly the same one that's used in chess.
The
but,
ELO algorithm, yeah.
Yeah, and it works well, but there's been a lot more recent algorithms that have been developed for other games that are much better. In particular, there's this one called TrueSkill, and it's used by games like Halo Infinite and like all the Microsoft games. They use it, and instead of just having a single MMR value, you have two values instead. So your MMR, and it's what we call the variance. And the variance is just saying how confident are we that that is your actual MMR.
Yeah.
And so the idea would be is if you're a new player, this variance number is quite big. It's quite large. So that means that we're not sure what your MMR actually is, but we're going to give you a 1,000 to start with, but you could be anywhere between 0 and 5,000. And as you play more games, that variance gets smaller. And the importance of this number is like when you're doing matches between players, you can take this variance number into account. Like if you have a teammate who has high MMR but they've got very big variance, then you won't lose as much MMR because we're not actually that confident that that is their MMR. Like you shouldn't be punished because your teammate has an inflated MMR. Maybe they haven't played for 3 years. They just came back and they've got this really high MMR that doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
So there's all these kinds of things that you can do to fix that by like applying different algorithms, but it's just we got to go through and try them out, see how they would work.
Okay, that's interesting. So I want to move on to the next subject, the new queue system. Is there any progress being made on that, or like what's it looking like? You're a guy behind the scenes.
To be honest, I'm not doing too much with that. It's mostly Cinder who's kind of got that, but I don't know what the progress is there. I think at the moment there's nothing in particular that's being done there yet. It's not going to be ready for next season.
Yeah, we can't expect it in season 9. I figured out that much.
Yeah, unfortunately,
Yeah,
I don't have
that's
any
valid.
updates on that one myself.
It's a real shame because I think it would actually be amazing for this game. Not even
It would be perfect.
in terms of like the ease of access and such, but for people like me and JPG who stream very often, we can just be like, oh, the next event starts at the hour, so I know I will play at that time. Because the way I see this system, it's kind of like infinite squad queues in a way.
Yep. Precisely. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, right out of the gate, being able to just know you're playing in the next event, it eliminates a huge problem in that if there are like just enough people to play in say tier A, but not enough people to both play in tier A and tier A2, then the odds of you getting in to the next tier A event might be like lesser than you think, because you have to can up right after race 12 and someone might beat you to the punch. And then just like that, you have to wait a good 45 to 50, 55, an hour, whatever the case is, minutes to play. And with this new system, that's the first problem that is like immediately just out of the question, because you don't have to actually wait to can up. You can just can up right away, because guess what? It's on an hourly basis, you're in.
I do think they should also then remove the penalty for canning up into the same tier. Like, let's say it's race 10 or something in the current tier A, I should be allowed to can up again if it's this new queue system. Because I probably won't get into a tier A that's already gathering, but I'll get into the next one.
Wait, with that in mind though, like, I thought how it works is like everyone would have access to like the canning up, and then everyone would just be like all the rooms would be distributed based off of like the MMR of like each
Yeah.
room, I guess.
That's-
That was the
That's
way
the
I
idea.
saw it.
There wouldn't
personally.
be there wouldn't be a tiers per se. It'd just be like squad
Okay,
tiers.
so it'd just be like this
Okay.
event starts at the hour and there's a new one at the next hour.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So like upon the current squad queue starting, or like the current solo queue starting, you could have already canned up for like the following hour.
Okay, I see. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, it'd be
It'd be something like
so
that.
relieving just being able to play at pretty much at any time you want. Like it's literally only on you for either canning up too late or just not canning up in the first place
Yeah.
if you don't end up playing.
No, that would be absolutely amazing.
Absolutely. I think something else that, well, okay. The number one complaint that people have about this, and I understand where it comes from, is that during like the dead zones for Lounge, if this system were to be implemented, then there would be more rooms than people would like where there's a wider skill gap. And I actually don't think this will be a problem at all. I think this problem will be completely like we'll just never see it. And there's a couple reasons why. So, first of all, the higher tiers pretty much already experience this problem in tier A because the gap between like say the highest MMR player and the lowest MMR player in every room is usually pretty massive.
Yeah.
You'll generally won't see this in tier S and especially not tier X, but in tier A, just so that it functions, the amount of people who will play with like say 12,500 versus say 15,000. That's a 2.5k gap.
I think 17,000 and 12,000 is a ridiculous gap. It'd pretty much be like, I have like 14,000, right? So that's like what, platinum level? If I were to play a tier BC pretty much, that'd be the equivalent to it.
Exactly.
A 5,000
Now-
MMR gap is just insane to have in
Absolutely.
the same tier.
And a similar gap exists in tier G, not necessarily in MMR, but just because the MMR range in tier G
In
has
scale,
a huge
yeah.
skill gap.
Yeah, because you have
Yeah.
placement people and you have people who just like never
Yeah.
have played a match in their life essentially.
Yeah, but the thing is, like when the skill gap exists in the lower tiers, it doesn't have as much penalty on the MMR because the MMR gaps are smaller. But in those big tiers, yeah, the huge MMR gap means there's bigger impacts to the MMR changes.
100%. I actually
yeah.
just thought of this now. Something that's really interesting about this new system is that if it were to be implemented, there would be far less people at 0 MMR because you could get into a room in the lower tiers with everyone in the room at 0 MMR, and that means at least like 6 people are going to get out of there. And this is
Yeah.
going to keep going every single time.
Actually, that's not how the MMR algorithm works, and that's actually a flaw that I didn't even think of before. So, as I was saying, the way the MMR algorithm works, like whatever is lost is gained, right? If everyone
Right.
has 0
Oh,
MMR,
right.
then technically no one would lose or gain MMR. It would all stay at 0 because
Huh.
of how the algorithm works today. Like that would be
Right.
essentially imagine if you're like the only person there with 1 MMR, then that only one person would get that MMR. Like it would.
But with that in mind, that's something that has to be considered for when this new
Yeah.
system is put together.
That's definitely a thing. Because if you're in the low tiers, you're never going to gain much MMR because the total amount of MMR available is just going to be so low.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Shoot.
Yeah, you would have to create like almost a new rank for the 0 MMR people at that point.
Yeah,
right?
well, I'm sure
You'd
we
have
can
to put
figure something
negative
out.
MMR in. You'd
Yeah.
actually have to put negative MMR
Yeah,
in.
you have like a MMR depth.
yeah.
You're just in the
That's
rent.
crazy.
Yeah, I'm not too sure how that would work. But yeah.
There's definitely ways around it. It takes some
Yeah.
time to think about it, but yeah, I think there's ways around it.
Yeah.
But okay, so Darky mentioned that the gap is always there at the evening.
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't think this will be the case in the new system and Rookie mentioned this in his video. There's a lot of mind games that go on when it comes to canning up
Yeah, that's
for,
true.
I mean, any tiers. Like for example, if I see tier A at 3 people and I see a bunch of people canning up and dropping like all in like the same line of text, I'm not canning up because I know it's not going to gather. If I know for a fact I can play at say 5 p.m. Eastern, and I want to, I'm canning up because I know I can play. And I can guarantee you a lot of people will do that as well. Dude, you could probably get like 3 tier A's going. And that's a bit much, sorry. You could probably get 3 tier B's going at 5 p.m. If you like eliminate all the mind games, they all know they're playing, like that's definitely able to happen. It's definitely possible. But because of the mind games and because you don't know if you're actually going to be able to play and you don't want to get that ping when you've canned up 15 minutes ago and you haven't said anything in the chat, people don't can up for that reason. It's a waste of time. And so naturally, you could get 3 tier Bs going instead of 0 if people knew they could play 100%. And that's what this system, the system will eliminate that problem. That's the main idea.
Yeah,
for sure.
And also, like, just by nature of how the matchmaking will work, it's going to minimize the MMR difference. You know, like if you have at random tier A, you're going to have the full range of tier A, but with this system, you're just going to get like a contiguous range of 12 people's MMR sorted, and that's probably going to be a much smaller gap.
Yeah, it'll mostly be a tier S rather than a tier A.
Yeah,
100%, and that will actually be really, really good for like the early times, or like the most active times for lounge, because then instead of like a tier A type like room one in the solo queue is going to be cracked.
Yeah,
it's going to be like a higher tier than tier X. That's what those are the kind of levels we're talking. Like it's going to be nuts.
Yes. Let's say all the masters would get up, you would get like a master Mogi in there. If it's room one. If everybody would like agree beforehand, hey, let's get up, like Kusan gathers his homies, then the lowest MMR in room 1 would be like 16,000, which is just insane.
Dude, that's like some tier Z stuff. That's a tier Z vibe. Come on now.
And tier X
that would be nuts.
Like play pretty often with this new system too, because if there's like roughly 50 or so diamonds, you only need 12 people really. So there can be multiple tier X's going at the same time even.
If they know they can play, it's only a matter of time.
I think that would
this
be
new
great
queue system
for
is perfect.
High level gameplay too, as well.
Absolutely. I don't think, well, I mean, once everything is coded and once like the algorithm is like perfect, especially for like the 0 MMR people, or like how you would have to change that up, I think once everything is sorted and everything's ready to go, I don't think there's a single flaw with the system. I would say like minimum like 99%. It's damn near perfection.
I can think of one flaw, and that's just because people won't really try it out at first yet. But I think as it first drops, the rooms are gonna be very unstable in high tier rooms. Like
what makes you say that?
It's, let's say you're playing at an inactive time where most Japanese people don't play, but you're still playing. I feel like you could be diamond and you could be like queued up with sapphire people if there's like 0 or little activity, but just in the first few days because people don't really know what it is yet.
Yeah, I think that'd just be a first couple days thing as well. I think after a week, it's like,
I think that's the only
people are gonna
possible.
realize. Yeah, and now it would only be a very short term thing. If this is like a thing that's gonna be, you know, like the regular for the next couple of years per se, then yeah, it's a done deal. It's flawless.
Yeah, there is one more thing which is a potential negative, which is that there's some people who like don't want to play in rooms with other people. Like you know, maybe you avoid them. You know that they're gonna troll you or something. There's no way to avoid them with this system. Like today, you can see that they're in the lineup. You cannot sign up for it. So yeah, that ability to do that, and that's definitely important for some people. There's people who've been harassed by people in the past, and they want to avoid these people at all costs. But maybe they've done their ban or whatever, and they've been unbanned.
But people do that already. Like in tier A, if some people can up, other people just drop or refuse to play. Yeah. I think it kind of worked the same this way, and maybe I think it's even like a good thing that you can't really avoid people anymore. And if they harass you, you just report them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think the only thing, I don't know if it'd be better to, you know, apply harsher penalties if we're dropping in this case, because I mean, maybe there is a system where it's like there could be like a chat full of people like in like say like the same MMR range who haven't canned up, for the solo queue, and then you could like tag in that chat if you need like a sub.
Mm-hmm.
That could be an option, because I was just gonna mention how like with this system, in theory, you could not get any subs if someone drops.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is actually
problem.
a pretty big flaw.
Yeah.
It's a big flaw, but it can be mitigated. If you, let's say, I mean, there would have to be some pretty heavy duty coding if I'm not mistaken, but let's say the MMR average, or let's say the MMR range, let's say like the player with the highest MMR is like 12,000 and the player with the lowest MMR in the room is 10,500. Every player who didn't can up into the solo queue within the 10.5k to 12k range will be put in a chat. This probably will not freaking work, but you get the idea. Like,
Yeah.
you get something like that going, and then if a room needs a sub, they just ping like whatever role they would get for not playing, and then if they can play, then they !C or like /C, and they get sent into a chat. I don't even know how it would work, but like the main idea is that there would be like a sub chat where you could call upon someone. It'd be on like a rank basis probably.
I also have another question, Fike.
Yeah.
Do you at one point in the future plan to have Lounge not run off Discord anymore and just run it off your own website?
I think that it's definitely an interesting idea, and I mean, I personally like it. I mean, it's not something that we've talked in depth with the other admins about to say, yeah, we're going to do this or not. But I can definitely see a huge advantage because, you know, it's going to be so much more accessible to people like who don't want to deal with the toxicity that comes up in Lounge all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're not having to interact with people, just being able to say, I want to play this match. Here's the friend code. I add them. I don't even have to speak to them, But yeah, it's definitely would be a huge like bit of work, you know. Like you'll have run into these situations all the time. Like I've disconnected, or oh hey, there's a random in the room. You need to be able to provide ways for people to be able to communicate those kinds of things to the host. And
Yeah.
you know, there's all sorts of edge cases that are not, you know, we're not going to be able to think of every single possible thing that a person might want to say to the host, or I don't know. I definitely like it. It would just be a lot of work, and I don't see it happening for another year at least if it does happen. But yeah, that is my view on it.
Okay, that's interesting. I was wondering if Lounge would ever take that direction myself. So
Yeah. I was thinking about the subs thing, and I think part of the problem would be is if the the solo queues were kind of set up to run every hour, then that would make it worse because people would be like, okay, everyone would be ready at that hour on the dot, and there would be no one around because everyone was already signed up for the hour. Like, there's not going to be anyone 2 minutes later who's like just missed out. But if you instead ran the solo queues more frequently, like say every 15 minutes, then there'll be less people in an individual solo queue event. That means more people available to sub in.
yeah.
If there's someone missing.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess finding the balance of, you know, how frequently to run these solo queue events so that there is subs available is something we got to figure out.
Alternatively, if a subsystem can't be implemented, the option to apply harsher penalties for not playing, because that's a guaranteed 11-player room or something like that, that is there. I don't know where you would go, or like how far you'd go to, I guess, punish people for not playing. But I would imagine in the event where you cannot have a subsystem, like, because you're guaranteed to be at 11 players or less with that in mind, it's like you got to make people not want to quit or not play. Obviously, there are going to be a few instances where it's like, let's say someone's internet goes out and it stays out. Didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
And it's hard to tell because like you can't even really control that. But at the same time, it's like if you compensate for that, then someone could easily just like BS their way through it and say like my internet went out, when in reality they don't want to play with someone. So it's kind of hard to tell.
It
what the
really
best
depends,
way.
like if you are liked or not. I think
Mhm.
because somebody may just like not report you if you do not show up for some reason. Like
True.
let's say, I don't know, your Switch died or something. If you're liked by the players, they probably won't report you. But if they dislike you, they'll definitely put it in.
Facts.
Yeah.
Also,
It's-
I wanted to talk about this. what are some suggestions, and chat, you too, like some suggestions that we should discuss in Lounge right now, like in the suggestions vote thingy?
Run through it.
Let's see what we have here.
I haven't looked at this at all, so I'm down to take a
Remove
look.
4v4.
Yeah.
I honestly think it should be gone. And it should be
Hard
a
to tell,
squad queue
yeah.
only event.
I think squad queue only would be good for 4v4.
Because let me give
I
my
think so
reasons.
too. Yeah.
66 was removed because people dropped if it was picked.
Mm-hmm.
Being a team captain, it took very long to pick the teams. Like, if a 66 were to start, it would be like 10 minutes of a wait until the room was actually up, because you have to pick everybody. And I've noticed, like, a couple of times, 4v4, if it gets picked, people drop as well, and the Mogi just had to be cancelled a couple of times. I think these unpopular formats just should not exist. Especially because 4v4 is, like, very uncommon, right? Like,
Yeah.
so...
And only a third of the room gains MMR, so it's like,
Yeah, you only gain for first. It's just a be all end all. Like, I
Yeah,
think it
and
should
my
only
view
be
on that as
FFA,
well-
2v2, 3v3.
Yeah, my view on that as well is like, if you remove 44 from solo queue and it's only available in squad queue, you at least know what you're signing up for.
Yeah.
Most people don't want to play 4v4 in solo queue. Like, it's usually just 2v2 with a couple people maybe wanting FFA, maybe 3v3 every now and then. But yeah, people generally don't want 4v4, and at least if it's in squad queue, you can play with 3 of your friends. You know what you're signing up for, and because it's like a third of the room, you're going to be more inclined to want to call with your teammates because it's going to be more communication heavy because there's more people in the room that's on your team. And sometimes people just don't want to do that if it's 4v4 in like solo queue.
Yeah, that's a good point. Come to say that, I think the only time I voluntarily played a 4-4 was the one I played with you.
Facts.
I would never vote
Yep.
for that shit regardless.
Never. It is pretty bad, but I mean, hey. That's actually a really good suggestion. I'm going to upvote that one.
Yeah, me too. Hopefully that happens.
Oh snap!
Yeah,
I
I mean-
just looked up. Someone suggested FFA hours. That will work the same as squad queues, but it's free for all. Okay, there we go.
Damn. You
Love
just
it.
took
Yeah.
that idea.
Love it. I'm
It's-
upvoting that one as well.
yeah.
That's too
I think
funny.
that one would only work in combination with the solo queue system. I think just because you're never going to get an FFA hours that's like applicable to all time zones.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it's always like there'll be some time zone and they'll be like, okay, yeah, well, FFA hours is always when I'm asleep, so you know, it's I guess you could change it, but it's
Ooh, I
I mean,
It's like
I
we
think,
mentioned
like, yeah.
earlier. Like we mentioned earlier, like you could implement FFAs, but it's like at the same frequency as say 4v4s. Or 6v6s rather.
Somebody just made a troll suggestion. DK Summit only Mogis. I fucking agree. But
yeah,
I have a pretty controversial one, I guess. A lot of people feel that Baby Park should be banned for picking. I mean, me personally, I feel the same way because people only pick it if they're trolling. I don't think there's a single player in the community besides maybe 1 or 2 who actually like Baby Park and think it's a good track.
Yeah, like 99% of people will not be upset if the track is banned.
So my question to the lounge admin here is, how come Baby Park is still allowed to be played?
I mean, like I will say though, like generally I'm not too involved in those kinds of balance discussions. That's more like the other admins, but I mean, I guess it's just hard to say. Like, I mean, I don't have too much skin in this game, I guess is what I'm going to say. I think I can see arguments for it being banned, or I could see arguments for it being kept. Like in the sense that, you know, if once you start a track ban, it's kind of like, you know, that's a big change. Like we haven't going from 0 track bans to like 1 track ban. People, you know, maybe in the higher tiers, I could see it possibly having more reason. But in the lower tiers, I mean, I don't know.
I have a
I haven't thought
suggestion
about it too
actually
hard.
about that. Could there at any point in maybe season 9 or season 10, I feel like it would be a good idea if there would be a rule set strictly made for the higher tiers and a rule set made for lounge in general, like the lower tiers. And then the higher tier rule set would be a bit more strict. Like you would enforce Baby Park ban, can't use like troll combos or some shit. Stuff that casual players would use, but that the pros could not exploit. You get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, no, I get it. I think we have had rules like that in the past, where there's been, things less strict for lower tiers. But I'm not against it on principle. I think it's a good idea. And I can see the reasoning. The higher competitive players want to maximize kind of the competitive integrity,
Yes.
make sure that you're not having unfair losses that may not be represented in lower tiers. Like there's a lot of people who they just want to main, like Isabel, for example, and that's totally fine. But they're I don't know, they're not usually in tier A.
Mm-hmm. Because like
Another thing
in
too
the Mogies I
is
play,
like,
is every single time I see Baby Park get voted, it's a team that's already losing. Like there's a guy on like 20 points after 7 or something, and he's just going Baby Park to just grieve the room.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I guess the other thing is if you're like maybe you're just not having any luck with running at the moment, you're not getting any chance to break through the pack. Is Baby Park technically a viable strategy to like you're more lucky than you are? I mean, I guess it's like I'm not saying that this is the way a competitive play should go. Like to intentionally choose a track that you're just going to say, okay, well, I'm going to have a better chance with RNG than actually doing something that requires skill. But if a player picks it, it could be a chance for them to get even a better point than because they're not having any luck with normal tracks. I don't know. I guess it's hard to say.
I can see how one would think that, but you're pretty much just saying, if I go to the casino, would I rather play poker or would I play Russian roulette?
Yeah, exactly.
And then Dry Desert, for example, would be playing poker because it's still RNG, but you can select the cards you've kind of dealt with like bagging with items and such. Baby Park is literally just straight up random. If you don't get the good items, you just lose. It's just as simple as that. Like you pull Bill Golden, you're done. You need stars on that track.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the people
Absolutely.
who do think that way would probably end up picking things like Cheeseland. Like I think that's how 6v6 as well goes sometimes. If you're playing against a really strong team who's just always holding top 5, then your only chance is to pick baggers because maybe you'll get someone in the top spots with a shock. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing too is if we're talking about like a cutoff where it's like this tier and above has to maintain this level of competitive integrity, this tier and below, it's more catered to the casual players. I almost feel like that cutoff has to be at like tier F or like tier like EF or something like that.
Yeah.
Just for the sole fact that like most of the casual players are in tier G. It's as simple as that. Most of the lower level players are in tier G. So like even saying tier EF is like generous because like I don't really know the level of like the players who are on like the lower end but are still like on a competitive level, I guess.
Yeah.
But I feel like that cutoff would have to be like really, really low instead of being like tier D and above is like this level of competitive integrity. This tier and below, you can pick Baby Park. Like, I mean, I just don't think that it can't like be somewhere in the middle. It has to be like the low tiers can like pick Baby Park and whatever if we were to implement this, and then all these other tiers apart from the super low tiers, you have to, act this way per se.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely agree. There's definitely a big skill gap between tier G and tier F even. I know I've been helping out a lot of the newer Australian players join the community and they're starting out in the lower tiers and they're really good players and I'll just see like wow the skill levels even in like tiers EF and F are quite strong. Like it's much stronger than I thought they'd be.
There's
Absolutely.
another suggestion here. Okay, no, that one is really stupid. I'm not even gonna say. There is one. It was make inactive people go back to their peak MMR. No, that is just straight up idiocy.
That is
Right,
too
right.
funny. Oh my god.
There's one here that's kind of interesting, which would go back into the competitive integrity if we look at other video games. Make
I know what
people
you're
who
talking
have
about.
diamond rank lose
never
MMR,
mind.
like they get rank decay if they are inactive
Oh.
for 2 weeks or more.
I think the solution to that is probably the variance thing I was talking about a while back with the true skill algorithm, because what you would do is rather than decreasing their MMR, you would just increase that variance value. So that means that, hey, like they are this MMR, but we're less sure about it. And so that means that, on their first loss, it's going to recalibrate their MMR better. It's going to go, hey, we think that their MMR range is anywhere like up or down 2000 MMR from here. And so your first loss like will steer you in the right direction, but your teammate who was playing with you won't be penalized as much for it. But it's I'm not too sure about rank decay. I think it has the potential to like there's lots of players who've been inactive who it's not because they haven't been playing, they just don't play lounge.
Yeah, but
And
wouldn't that kind of motivate them in a way to come back to playing lounge? If
I
let's
don't
say
think yeah.
I think 2 weeks is way too little. But let's say if you're inactive for longer than a month, your MMR starts decaying by like 25 per day, for example. It's like a very small number, but it would maybe motivate that player
Yeah.
to come back until they D-rank and go back to like Ruby 2, and then the MMR decay stops. But that would also make Diamond feel a bit more elite, and so that you can't really camp and keep it, you know what I mean? Like, you kind of have to keep playing to earn it, and it would be a more
Right.
exclusive role this way. Maybe even Master or Grandmaster could only have rank decay, so you kind of have to fight to keep it, and it's like actual... It's already a big achievement, but it would be even more elite of a role.
Well, I
For
guess
sure.
it depends on what you see MMR as. Like, is MMR a leaderboard for like people to compete on, or is it like a representation of your ranking? Because if it's the first one, then yeah, I think that it makes sense to kind of like not reward people for camping once they've gotten a good MMR. But in the second one, you wouldn't do that because the player hasn't gotten worse per se.
Yeah.
And so if you like when they rejoin, hey, they're going to be at a lower MMR. They're just going to make the rooms that they play again suffer because their MMR dropped.
Well, often
Yeah,
people get quite rusty at the game, though.
yeah,
Because,
yeah,
I don't know what would be a good example. Let's say Sander, okay? Like, he's been coming back to the game, right? And he's obviously insanely cracked. But I think he's good where he is with his MMR right now, because he's not, like, drastically gaining, but he's not, like, losing a lot either. But you would think that Sander, he's, like, a master level player. Why would this guy be placed in Sapphire? But people do de-rust, and if you haven't played Mogi in
yeah.
a while, especially with the new meta and such, you really start seeing that. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to give MMR decay, even if it's like very little. Like, just put people down like one rank at max if they are quite inactive.
Yeah. It also could be that maybe they've been muted from lounge or something. I guess as well. Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of things. Like they could be focusing on MKU or doing the Japanese MK blog events or summit, that kind of thing. And so that's how they're keeping up to date. And maybe they're just not playing as much lounge. But yeah,
100%.
I don't know.
Perhaps. Let's see. There was another suggestion that, well, a lot of people in general think that tier A should, if there's like a lot of people who can see it, I guess with the higher tier players would want Ruby 1 removed from tier A, or like they would want Diamond removed from tier A pretty much, and make tier A Ruby 1 and Ruby 2 only, so that tier S and X could gather more often. Because, let's say, John already said this too as an example, but he just wants to play, right? So if I want to play and I see tier A is at like 9 out of 12, and I can get up, and I see tier S is at 3 out of 12, which one am I going to play?
There you go.
Yeah.
Ture, voila.
So I think if you want to increase the more skill-based rooms in a higher level, that you should ban the high-level players from playing in tier A, because it's just easy access and you force them to play in the higher tiers then.
Yeah.
I don't know what
I
your
mean,
thought
ultimately, I
process is
think
on that.
solo queue. I think the solo queue is probably the solution to this in the end. Like, there's always, if you remove the higher players from those tiers, then that means that they're going to have less events that they can just play in at all. The you know, I mean, I don't have too much input on on the balance of what ranks go in what tiers. But I mean, I think the solo queue would solve that for the most part.
Another thing too, I'm very certain this has been tried at least 2 seasons now. Like on 2 different occasions. I mean, not necessarily in a row. Like Sapphire 1 and Sapphire 2 would be in tier A, or like more recently, like Ruby 1 and Ruby 2 would be tier A, and that's it. Honestly, I just think there's not enough players like altogether. I feel like it always just comes back to like Sapphire back then or Ruby 1 and above now have to have access to tier A just for it to function. It's been tried in the past, and I feel like tier A just naturally is gonna either like it's not gonna be as active, it's gonna die more quickly.
Yeah.
In this case, I think just right now we don't have enough players to make it
I
run,
do
especially with the
have an
current mind
interesting
games people play.
compromise.
Let's hear it.
What if you make the tier A entry level, instead of 12,000, make it like 12,250, so that somebody who has reached Ruby 1 can't just see tier A right away. They have to like win another match to actually see it. So they need
Actually,
to play
a
like
really cool suggestion.
AB.
Even in general too. Even in general, like, what if the tier you see is like the tiers you see are different from like the rank you have, and it's more based on the MMR you have. So instead of, like you mentioned, Vantox, instead of it being say 12,000 to let's say 13,000 for tier A. I mean, I know it's not exactly that, but just as an example, between 12,000 and 13,000, and instead it's like 12,500 to 13,500. So
Yeah.
even if you were to hit Ruby 1 right away, you'd still only have access to tier A, but you'd still have to further earn your way into tier A. And then and also too, it's like if you get beat up in like your first tier A since hitting Ruby 1, then you're not just going to be sent straight down to
Yeah.
Sapphire 2.
You're not just
You'll
gonna
still be at
derank.
Ruby 1, but yeah, you'll just not have access to the same tiers, I guess, in that case.
And that would
I
also
think that's
kind
actually
of
a
work
really
as
good
like
idea.
a placement idea, because it would
Yes!
prove if you belong in that tier or not.
Exactly. I love that idea, actually.
Yeah, I think it's that we suffer from having a game where even at the top levels there's these huge skill gaps. You know, like we even among the top 200 or 300 players in the scene, like there's huge skill gaps. So no matter what cutoffs you specify, eventually it's going to drift apart from like the skill kind of gaps that exist there. Like people are going to get stronger, or the strongest people are going to get even stronger. So yeah, I mean, like that, all that could work, but yeah, I still think solo queue is probably the only feasible solution to this. It's just, I mean, yeah, like I'm in Plat 1 at the moment, so I haven't played in those higher tiers to be
Yeah.
able to really comment on it. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me, and I think that's also part of what like the kind of MMR redistribution. The goal is each season is to kind of reset the kind of MMR inflation that some of the top players have had, and make it so that those ranks have more players in them. But it's only a temporary solution. Like after a few months,
Yeah.
once people play more games, the skill gaps grow and the MMR gaps grow as well.
I honestly think until the solo queue system is there, that this could be a good way of like
Yeah,
introducing players to like a higher tier for the first time. That they have like an easier entry point. Because right now, like let's say, I don't know, you can play like tier B only and you're Ruby and you're like, oh my god, I want to play with Kusan, and then you just drop like 30 in your very first tier
Yeah.
A. And that's not fun for anybody. It's not fun for you. It's not fun for your teammate. I think you should prove yourself first before you actually decide to play in that, if that makes any sense.
yeah, that's definitely.
Absolutely.
Okay, is there any other launch suggestions you guys see that could be interesting?
I think the big one for me, I mean, I'm obviously going to mention this, but I think the big one for me has got to be the free-for-all squad queues, or just free for all, like free for all join kind of thing. It would definitely be in like the same, like in the same chat, I guess, as the squad queues. But I think that would actually be really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
Give people a guaranteed opportunity to play on their own. Everything's on them, and people like free for all. There are people who like free for all, even though most people like 2v2. So it definitely gives that opportunity for sure.
Yeah, I want to revisit the suggestion I kind of mentioned when my mic cut out earlier, which was the like idea of gimmick SQs or that kind of thing. And like I know it was suggested in Rookie's video as well, like maybe ones where there's track bans or that kind of thing. And well, I think that could make Lounge more interesting and more fun. Then one of the problems I have with that is people like, let's say you had a gimmick which was inward only events, right? Then if you're an inward player, it would not make sense for you to play any mode except the inward only events because you're going to gain MMR the most in these kind of gimmick events. So what you don't want to do is create these, you got to be careful in creating these kinds of events that you don't incentivize players to only wait for those events and do nothing else, because otherwise they're like, maybe their MMR is 14,000 in inward only events, but 13,000 if they include normal events,
Well, that was my main reason and argument when we did talk about it in the previous podcast. It should be unranked. Like, there should be no MMR on the line for these gimmick events. It should just be purely for fun.
I don't think they necessarily have to be unranked. I think just the gimmicks have to be like implemented with respect to competitive integrity. So I think track bans, for example, are like a perfect example of that, because you can still play your freaking heart out. You're not like at a disadvantage or anything because Mario Kart Stadium is banned. Like, it's all good. You can still play. You're just playing slightly different tracks. Actually, very different tracks, to be fair. But in any case, like, you can still play the same way you played before, just on different tracks. I think that is an example that perfectly like maintains the competitive integrity. And there are probably a couple other rule sets like that. I don't know if random track bans would be a good idea for that, but because I mean that's a gimmick that's definitely like on the edge of competitive integrity. But at the same time, it's like, let's say you randomly banned like 16 tracks in that case, you still have 64. So surely you're going to be able to pick tracks where it's like, it's not like you're just screwing the competitive integrity of the event is the main idea.
I think if
you can work around, if as long as you don't go over the line, then of competitive integrity, and you like, it's just not a good time for competitive players, then I think these gimmicks can go on for squad queues, even if they're ranked.
I think one gimmick that could be interesting as well is the idea of like eliminating track picks altogether, and you could say that every race the bot will pick a track that everyone has to pick, and so that like it's a fully randomized one. But like I don't know how that would play out or if people would even like it. But like that one would still remain somewhat competitive integrity. It's just like there's less dependence on these tracks. Like if they come up, they come up, but it requires people to be more general skill at like all levels on all tracks.
I think with MMR on the line, people are definitely gonna want to pick their tracks though.
Yeah, 100%. The main idea. I want to have my comfort picks, like.
Yeah, like I don't want to get first and then I end up playing like, what's a good example here? Mary Mountain.
Yeah.
Like that would just be like the biggest slap in the face because it doesn't get picked, period. But if that's the random pick, then it's like, shoot. With MMR on the line, I don't know if like the random picks is like the way to go. I think random track bans, if it's like 16 max, would definitely be really good. Because then it's like, you're not just going to get every runner banned unless it's like that one instance.
I also have another suggestion.
Yeah.
In Squad Queue, there should be a new channel, and it should just be a bot that posts LMMR like every 5 minutes or so. And there's only a bot that does that.
Wait, what do you mean by like LMMR?
The command LMMR shows the list of every player in the squad queue. But since there's like a delay on it for players, and there's also a timeout function in the squad queue room itself, in like squad queue join, I think it would be better if a bot would just constantly keep refreshing that and keep using that command rather than players actually using it. So that if they want to see the lineup, they just look at that other channel.
100%. I like that.
I don't know how
I-
feasible that is.
Yeah, I'm not too sure I understand, but I think, I mean, it doesn't sound like it'd be too difficult to implement.
It's like it's like the Mogi list channel,
Yeah,
but for,
but for
squad
squad
queue,
queue.
and then with
Ah.
like update for the MMR of each player or each team.
Yeah, so
Okay.
if you see in squad queue join fike, just like control FL MMR, pretty much that command, it would just get posted by a bot.
Oh, the join channel. Sorry, I was thinking about
Yeah,
like once
the
the
join
channels were
channel.
made. Okay, yeah, now I get it. Yeah, good.
Would that be feasible, or would that be too complicated to code?
I mean, I think having a channel with that list, yeah, should be feasible. I don't see any reason it couldn't be, just like the Mogi list channel.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, I couldn't give any ETA on that right now. Because yeah, like most of the stuff around the bot itself is all Cinder's development. I just work on like the back end of the website, which is does the MMR calculations and stuff and stores the results.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Hell yeah.
Is there anything else that's like a hot topic in launch suggestions? They're all that's just
It's
go.
pretty crazy seeing how Tyrrell's been going in the 200cc lounge, and I think we see like players getting up to incredible MMRs.
I think you can see right there like how unbalanced that is. But the player
Yeah.
base of 200 is too small, so it has to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh, there's one here that's makes sense to me. I think I upvoted this one. Make it so that a player who played at least 6 races without a mate will get MMR plus or minus based on a FFA multiplier. It's not possible to gain without a mate. It's just an instant loss. Reduced MMR loss is good, but you still lose MMR and you play the whole Mogi knowing you'll lose.
Yeah, I think the reason we have the rule today is because it can be abused easily. Like it's one of those rules that like we hate to have. There's lots of things where we would love to say like, hey, like if your internet actually died, you don't lose MMR because it was out of your control. But it can be abused. You can like disconnect because you're having a bad race and say the internet dropped.
Yeah, you can just
in
tell
a
your
similar
mate
way,
to drop.
Yeah, exactly. Like you could bully them. Like if you're struggling, if your mate's doing really badly, you could say, "Hey, look, you're doing really badly. Please leave the match." And then so that means that I don't get MMR drop. And like obviously that person should be punished for that, but these people might feel guilty for performing badly, and they'll say, "Okay, look, I'm doing really badly. I'm going to drop so that you don't lose MMR or something." And we don't want to encourage that kind of behavior. So
100%.
I definitely support those kinds of rules. It's just you really got to find a good balance that isn't abusable.
Yeah. No, I understand completely.
Like one of the ones on that kind of front, which I was thinking about recently, is what about those matches which have gone on for like an hour and a half already because there's been DCs, there's been people dropping, there's been subs. Like in those cases, like we kind of want to like make it so that people aren't penalized if they haven't like reserved an hour and a half of free time after they've canned up. But at the same time, if you're doing really poorly, you could, especially if you're the host, it's possible to like artificially delay it, or I don't know. It's difficult to kind of add these rules, even if they make perfect sense.
I don't know.
But I think in that case, it'd be a good one to add to say, hey, like there's a cap of an hour and a half, and if it goes over that, and then you're okay to drop. But yeah,
I don't know how often Launch Dev does this, but I feel like if an event is just way too laggy, like that Launch Dev already does a good job, don't get me wrong, but they should be a bit human in like being, hey, this event probably won't be fun because there's been like 3 DCs already and people don't wanna keep going. Like the room has crashed like 3 times already or some shit. Like I think you should just cancel an event if that happens.
Yeah, I think as well. Like if there's just too many DCs, it should be cancelled. There's also like a lot of misconception about how kind of the lag works in this game. Like a lot of people think, oh, if it's laggy, then it's the host's problem. But from what I've know from speaking to many people, such as like modders and stuff, It's always because of some player in the room. It's not because of the hosts
Yeah.
typically.
It's so
So
weird how that
yeah,
happens. It's like you can have a perfectly good connection and somebody else has a toxic connection at the time and they DC and you're just gone. You're gone
so
with
like
them. It makes no sense.
Yep.
It's the most
Yeah.
tilting thing.
and
Dunzo.
people will say, oh, the host needs to change, but that's not going to change a single thing. Like it's not the host ban. The host doesn't change anything. People say it because they want to point a finger at someone, but like when we talk about item lag, the real cause of item lag is because you'll have there's these rules about like what is the maximum number of a certain
Mhm.
item that can exist at a time. And so whenever you pull an item, you need to know what the other 11 items the players in the room have.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, like you can't just like say, okay, I'm going to get a shock because what if there's 3 other shocks in play at the moment? So if you can't figure out one player in the room what their item is, then you get item lag because you're still trying to get this 12th player's item, but you can't figure it out. And so everyone is going to get this item lag because they can't communicate with this player. And it doesn't go through the host. Like you're actually like sending 11 requests to all the other players in the room. So anyway, that was just my rant. I've just
I
like
have
I see a
another
lot of
suggestion based off
about
that. Like, if there's item lag by any chance, since you guys host ban people for being an irresponsible host, I feel like if there's item lag in the room and you notice this as a host, you should just be allowed to close the room if you notice item lag for 2 or more sets. So
Yeah,
you're on the host list, you're like a responsible host because you're not host banned, right? So I think hosts should have that power to just make the Mogi
yeah.
flow more smoothly.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I think it'd be something, maybe a good suggestion for the suggestions channel. I mean, if people support it, I wouldn't be opposed to adding it as a rule. I think that makes sense as well.
I think I suggested that before actually, but I couldn't really like figure out words to put it. But the way I
Yeah,
explain it now just makes sense that you have a list of responsible hosts. And
yeah,
I think it's better than like if you finish a race with item lag and you get like top 2 or some shit, like your mood is just going down the drain because that race doesn't count, right?
yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like it's a killer, especially in the back. If all you're doing is pulling triple shrooms, it's like what can you do? Everyone else is getting triple shrooms.
But I think that should be a good thing for hosts. And while we're
Yeah.
on that topic, I don't think that you should allow players to host who constantly overbag. Like, let's say they pick dried radish or cheese, and they just DC the
Yeah.
room. I feel like you should get a warning for that if you're a host.
I think it is. Well, that is technically in the rules. It's just one of those things that's not really like people don't know or don't really enforce well. Like, we have a rule that says if the room crashes, then the host needs to do a 30-second clip. And we're going to see in the 30-second clip if they overbagged. And
Hmm.
if that's the case, then that's going to be reviewed by staff and they could potentially be host banned for that
I don't
because
know
they
what goes on
overbagged.
behind the
But
scenes,
yeah,
but because like I'm totally clueless on that. Like I had no idea
yeah.
you guys reviewed overbagging as like a reason to host
It,
ban.
I can't say for sure about that side of thing, but I mean, I think if you're a host who's always over bagging, I mean, I think you should be like, because it could be an easy way to like if you're doing badly, you get a track you didn't want, you could just go, oh no, I overbagged, but
Yeah.
really you just wanted to close the room without really closing the room.
Hmm.
So maybe I don't know. I'll have to see. I haven't personally worked on many cases around that specifically.
I also see Stevens in my chat. Like he probably also knows more about this with Lounge.
Yeah, Stevens would know more
I
about
don't
it.
know how.
Um,
Like maybe I should have invited another person to talk about cases and such like this, but
Yeah, I don't handle too many of the harassment cases or that like all those reports at the moment. But sometimes I will get involved in a few to kind of give my perspective. But yeah,
But
let's see if there's any other suggestions.
I'm kind of curious. So I want to hear your thoughts about the latest 1v1 lounge trend.
oh,
I
What's
never
in it?
even
that's an
played in
interesting
that
one.
honestly, so I can't really give an opinion.
Well, I played for like the first week or so, and then I maybe played like one event every now and then, like since then. Honestly, I think the big problem with it right now is just like, I think it'd be really cool if it was more active, but like, I feel like once you get to, because everyone starts at the same rank, everyone starts at gray, and then like tier F, like everyone starts at tier G. Tier F is like as dead as can be, pretty much. And you'd think that wouldn't be the case because you only need one other person to can up, which is really cool in itself. Like you only have to rely on one person. But it's like the more you rank up, like the less you can play is the main idea.
Is it still active?
I think tier G is like the lowest tier where everyone has access to. I think it's somewhat active. Actually, the last event that was played was like, I think 5 hours ago. So maybe not so much active, but I mean, honestly, I think 1v1s just, well, long story short, just aren't as competitive as Lounge. I mean, it's so easy to just win. It's so hard to win when you are like 2 seconds behind because you just can't pull red shells. I know that people have talked about like maybe trying out frantic items, but I don't know how much people have dove into that with 1v1s. Maybe you can pull more reds. Maybe it's a bit closer, more engaging. Maybe there's some cool custom item rule sets that could make 1v1s more competitive, more engaging, because I mean, right now it's like, it's so hard to pull double reds in second to catch up unless you're like maybe a second at best behind first.
Yeah.
So it's like right now 1v1 Lounge just isn't really like that appealing, I guess.
think 1v1 is very skill based in this game, honestly.
You have to find a perfect custom item set to make it worth playing competitively, I would say.
Yes.
And even then, that's like way more challenging than it should be. Simple as that.
I'm trying, this
Although
season
I
started-
do think that these like these lower or like less player type formats are really cool to experiment with. Like I really like the March Madness 2v2 tournaments that happen every year. I think those are freaking sick. I haven't played a 3v3 or a 4v4 in so long. I'd love to play one of those again.
Oh, I haven't played one in ages.
Yep, it's been too long, but I mean, every now and then I love to throw down for a 3v3 or a 4v4. I feel like that could be really fun. But I don't know how easily that could be implemented into like, I guess, anything really.
I'm surprised to hear that the 1v1. Oh, sorry.
I think I went through like all the suggestions, so I'm gonna go through suggestions log and see like if there's any good ones. Maybe they got denied. That could be interesting.
I think I saw FFA, like the FFA for Squawk, you get denied because, and the reason was that it's like, I think it's like useless or something. What was the exact reason? Let me try to scroll and find it again. Any day now.
Oh, there's a really interesting one here that also applies with rules and such. Lean towards giving more strikes and less MMR penalties. MMR is used as a measure of skill on the ladder. Dropping from a Mogi or picking a track does not change one's skill.
I totally agree with that. I think it's something we've just done historically to, do MMR penalties. But I mean, like as I was talking about earlier, it depends. Like, what do we see? Is it a leaderboard for people to get the highest number, or is it a true reflection of your skill? And if we're talking about it being a reflection of your skill, then penalizing people with the MMR doesn't make sense. It just means that they're just going to gain it next. So,
my thoughts personally is I think if you advertise the Lounge as a competitive ladder, which you guys do in the welcoming channel, you shouldn't penalize based off MMR. And MMR should be a reflection of your skill.
I like that a lot.
It is a competitive ladder.
Yeah. I think it's just like we have very little levers to control about like if someone does something that needs to be penalized, that actually disincentivizes them from doing it again. I mean, like, the mutes and that kind of thing is pretty much the only, ability to do that.
Yeah.
But like, if it's something that we wouldn't mute someone over, like, let's say it was a repick, like, are we really going to prevent someone from playing Lounge if they repick? I mean, I guess we could. It's just, got to find the right balance there. But also, it doesn't make sense to penalize them
maybe if they repick multiple times. If they repick like once, just like mute them for the rest of the day.
That's a really good idea. I like that a lot.
Yeah. We also have to balance as well the workload that staff have to handle as well. I mean, like currently we have a ridiculous amount of staff, and at any given moment there's about 30 or 40 tickets open. that we're
Yeah.
dealing with.
I've heard about that.
so-
Damn.
Yeah, it's the more rules you add, the more things like that it becomes like this huge burden that we can't keep up with. But I mean,
100%.
it doesn't mean we can't add rules. Just gotta be careful you don't make it so that the number of tickets doubles.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Would there at one point maybe be like an automated bot that could handle tickets like, hey, this guy like didn't use the correct name in FFA. I want him to be striked, and then a bot just does it.
I think that could work. I think we'd also need an automated appeals process as well. Like, so when it happens, the person who gets penalized gets a message saying, "Hey, we penalized you for this. If you disagree with this, then click this button and we'll make a ticket to discuss
Yeah,
it."
I think that would be
interesting
perfect
idea.
because the launch bot already like DMs you and tells you, hey, you did this wrong, blah blah blah. Like I got chat restricted and the launch bot DM'd me the reason. So I feel like you guys could automate tickets in a way.
Yeah, it's the only thing is that the ticket spot currently is not developed by us. I think that more and more we're getting more features where we'd love to be able to add our own features to the ticket spot. We just don't have the ability to right now. But going down the line, I'd love to work on our own ticket spot that's custom built for the lounge community.
100%. Well, I mean, we talked about this earlier, but I don't know. The suggestions in Japanese, but I'm assuming it is something related to
Which one is
implement
it?
FFAs in the squad queue. I'll just break it down. The suggestion is free for all in squad queue, and that was denied because since it's meaningless, we don't hold free for all squad queue except for new wave squad queue. I don't know how it makes sense. I don't know how meaningless
What
makes sense
suggestion
here.
was that?
I can't tell exactly what it is. The suggestion was in Japanese, but I think it's something related to like free for all and squad queue. Oh, number 1790.
1790. All right,
1790. Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
I see. FFA no
I-
squad queue.
I think it's something that personally I'd say maybe it's been denied prematurely. I think
Mhm.
there's a bit more to it than that. So I mean, I'd personally be okay for reopening it, but it's possible I missed some discussion in the staff chats about
100%.
it. But that's my view on it. Yeah.
100%.
Oh, there's one here, and I also want to add on to this one. So, a lot of people keep asking for the squad queue gains to go back to like the 0.75 multiplier. And I honestly think that like maybe something should be done about that in a way. I personally think squad queue is fine the way as is, but I can see why a multiplier would help too. Because there's certain people who just only play squad queue. And
Yeah,
they
but-
kind of have an advantage for it. Like, let's say I would pick out a lower level player with lower MMR that doesn't launch a lot, so I'm pretty much playing with a Smurf.
Right.
And he's like, let's say he's like gold MMR, right? And I'm diamond, so we get put into like room 5. This guy is way better than gold. He's probably like sapphire level. Isn't that just unfair in your eyes?
I think yes. There's kind of two things to this. Is that I'll just talk about the case firstly of like a high player playing with a low player, and both players are at the correct MMR. Like we've done the maths before and looked at it, and there is no like statistical advantage to playing with someone lower than you. Like if they're at the correct MMR, obviously the problem falls apart when the player you're playing with is at an MMR that doesn't represent their skill. Maybe they're someone who intentionally lost matches to make it so that they can boost their other players. And there's been many cases of this happening. And it's fortunate when it happens, but when we do catch it, we kind of reverse those gains that those people have had and like mute them for that. So it's not something like we're okay with letting through. But I think because of that, I think that might be enough to counteract this. But if it's the case where like, the person's low MMR, not because they intentionally dropped, but just because they haven't played enough matches to get to their MMR, that's the difficult situation. And I think is the occurrence rate of that happening enough to make it so that everyone is 0.75? I'm not too sure, especially when, you can just play more matches, right?
Yeah.
Like if you only play squad queue, it doesn't matter what the gain rate is. You're still going to be gaining regardless if it's unfair.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess to give an example of such a player, I'm sorry to put you out there, but like my friend Tyler, right? He doesn't play lounge at all, besides squad queue pretty much, because he just likes playing with his buddies. But he doesn't play regular tiers. So this guy's at like platinum level, I would say. But I think in reality, his skill would be like Ruby 1.
Right. For cases like this where someone's at an MMR level that's much less than they are, that we do have a squad key restrict rule for those cases. But I mean, I still am not sure if that would be like justified for Tyler's case here either. But like that's what we've done in the past for if we've noticed someone drop MMR by a large amount. But yeah.
Well, he just hasn't played really. Like he
Yeah,
was
exactly.
inactive, and he's getting back into the game again. So he's like a unique case.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not too sure how we'd handle that one.
I don't
Think of
think
anything,
you can really do anything about that
Yeah.
besides maybe restrict people from playing in squad queue with like a certain
Yeah.
MMR mate. Like let's say you're diamond, you can only play with a Ruby 1 player at max.
I'm not too sure I'd want to do that personally. I think because like as we've seen before that like if it is a fair rank, like the MMR is representative, it doesn't give you any advantage, but it will give you an advantage if I mean like you could easily say the same thing happens if you're a silver player and you're paired up with another silver player who's actually like a diamond or something. I mean, obviously that doesn't really happen, but
Yeah.
you know you're going to get the same advantage. That like looking at the MMR gap isn't really going to handle all these cases. Like it works the other way around too. But yeah.
Also, I like another suggestion based off placement. I think when you guys start the new launch season, I think you guys should make it so that the players who are already really high up there, if anything, like they should get hard reset to like Diamond 1 at 14k, not like 14,500, because I think people got Master quite easily in the last season. So if you're at 14,000, you just lose Diamond right away, I assume, if you just lose. And I feel like that would be a lot better. Because people can really climb massively at the start. When
Yeah.
Master should be like a really hard achievement, and somebody last season got it in like 2 weeks.
Oh yeah, that's tough.
I mean, if they're the kind of player who gets master in the current season, like, you know, it's hard to say. Like, if we're just setting them back so that they have to play more matches, I think is it really going to make it harder for them to get master? Because all it's doing is maybe they take like maybe 10 or 20 more matches to do so, but they're still going to get there in the end.
I don't think that's
Is
a bad
that a goal?
idea. Because you'll put them at you'll put everybody at a lower MMR who got Grandmaster and Master and such. They're all at 14k, so gaining is gonna
Yeah.
be quite a bit harder at the start. Better than if people are already at 14,500. Like you may not think that it makes a big difference, but that's like a 30 MMR average, like based off a gain, pretty much.
Yeah.
And that adds up.
Yeah, I think I could get behind it, but I think it'd be interesting to have the opinion of other, you know, like Cinder or other folks in the higher tiers, because I'm not too familiar with how the players in the higher tiers are grinding up to master in that, and like what their preferences are.
Let's see. What else is there here? Do you see any like good suggestions, John?
Taking a gander right now. I'm not seeing anything like, I guess, really worth talking about that we haven't already talked about.
I have one actually, which is about including individual scores in any fashion to the MMR algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
Like, on your thoughts on that? I guess from my perspective is that, you know, if you include any kind of encouragement for individual scores, then even if it's like 5%, then people are just going to there's less of an incentive for team kind of
Yeah.
scores. But it's definitely a very popular request, especially by the higher level players in the higher tiers where there's the big skill gaps, and getting penalized just for having a bad teammate or who's much
Really?
lower MMR.
I figured it would
Wait,
be like
what?
the lower tier players trying to suggest that, because that suggestion is just straight up idiotic. No offense, like
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't like that one at all.
because
Okay,
if
yeah.
I'm doing poorly, right, I can just focus my mate and get more points, and he gets a low score, and then I still gain MMR for it. Like that's stupid. Like
Yeah.
you should win as a
You
team.
know, yeah. I mean, yeah, I totally agree. We definitely had some players who suggested it that were in the higher, but we've also seen it from lower tier as well.
I mean, it's interesting though because I mean, who wants to get first overall individually and then they're losing MMR?
Yeah, that's true.
Like,
That
I
is the
understand
worst.
where
Yeah.
it comes from.
Like when I play, if I get 40 just because or 50 because I'm just doing really badly, like I feel really really guilty that my teammate who like carried and got 100 but still lost MMR because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so like from that side of thing, you go, oh man, I feel like if I could just donate some of the MMR I lost to them, like say, hey, look, your MMR loss isn't as bad because you did more of the work for this. But at the same time, if that happened, then it would encourage them to possibly not care about team play. If
If
that
you
was like a
could
standardized
donate
thing.
MMR, John and I would be Grandmaster because we would just get our community to give us everything.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
my
definitely.
god, that'd be funny. I don't know. I feel like if we're talking about individual scores, I think maybe the only way to really implement it in a good way would be if you like score over 100, then you get like a certain percentage of MMR gain. I think if you score like maybe below 50, then you lose more. I don't know. Like 50 plus, like if you're getting scored between 50 and 70, more than likely it's just a bad event. Like,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's pretty hard to score less than 50. I've only done it like once or twice at best. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty hard to implement a rule like that, but I think it could be healthy in the sense that like, I mean, I don't understand people's logic. Like, if they're gonna complain about that, then just pick free for all.
Oh, also,
Like-
I have another question, Fike.
Yep.
I'm thinking about all kinds of random stuff right now. So, the launch chatbot automatically deranks you because it notices that you dropped MMR in rank, right?
Yeah.
Could you also make it so that the launch chatbot gives you a temp roll, like automatically, if it notices you're still playing? So that you don't have to do it
I
manually
suppose
so
it-
people can abuse it?
I suppose it could. I think the thing is that the bot that does the like room gathering is different from the one that does the role changing. So like it doesn't really have any way to get that information easily. We'd have to kind of to do that. We'd have to like move that logic from the Mogi bot over to the MK8DX bot. But I mean, it's definitely a good idea, and I think in the long term, definitely something we'd want to do.
I see. And I have a follow-up question to that, and that's in MKW, the bots are made so that if you just it's linked to the Wim5 servers, right? So I wonder if you guys have any contact with coders or something that you could input an image of like the final result screen and it automatically makes a launch table for you. That would be sick.
I mean, stuff like that can be made. It's just, there's going to be people who take photos with like their phone or something. I don't know. It's like stuff like that exists. I'm pretty sure that Lorenzi Table Maker actually has that functionality built in, but it struggles a lot with Japanese characters, especially, and it will produce garble. But I don't know. And also, like, a lot of people don't use the names they have in Lounge. So
Yes.
it would output it, and then you'd have to just change the
Yeah.
names anyways.
That brings me to another point. I was randomly talking about this with Daniel when we were doing like a 2v2. He thought that to make the launch look more competitive and like more accessible from like an outside viewer thing, that people should be forced to use like their names in the launch match. So let's say my tag is C, instead of using like, I don't know, Calamity, I would have to use like C Fantox. And
Yeah, I
then
mean,
with that
I'm-
system, you
yeah.
could also automate the lounge tables.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that could work. It's just it depends on what the people want. Like, if a suggestion gets voted up high enough for that, then it would be good. But I think that it's quite unpopular, but I might be wrong. I think a lot of people like the freedom of expression for their usernames. in
I think
Lounge.
people like freedom too, but they're missing the bigger part of the picture. Like lounge table automation could be possible if people just use their
Yeah.
lounge names.
It makes everything so seamless.
Yeah,
That would make it so that you would queue up, you'd have the results of a table, it gets posted automatically by the bot, and it could even get updated automatically too.
there was someone who recently reached out to us who had actually made a bot. We're talking with them, and it was like if you post your score just in the chat, like after a match, it would automatically make the table at the end of it. So it's not exactly the same, not based off the image, but that's another approach. I think that one would probably be a little better because I mean, if you DC, then you can, it'll handle that because you just say like, what's your total score, and all you have to do is at the end of the match say, hey, like at like 90, and then once all 12 people have done it, it'll automatically create the table.
Yeah,
I think that could work. But yeah, nothing's gone forward on that discussion.
So we're gonna wrap it up here soon, but I wanted to talk about like maybe a few changes you guys have in mind for season 9. If you would care to share some, like maybe a new rank or something that we should know about, or a really big one, or is everything still a secret? Or can you spill the
I think
beans on like
everything's-
one feature?
Everything's still a secret, but it's not. I'm gonna say it's not as like big as the season 8, like previous seasons. I think like we did a lot of the good rebalancing last season, especially with the boosting up the ranks significantly to kind of help with the MMR distribution.
100%.
So it's nothing. I don't think there's going to be anything as drastic this time, but I can't really give any details yet, unfortunately. We're also
Okay.
still working on that, to be honest.
Oh, it's still being worked
they'll-
on?
Well, it's like we're finalizing things, making sure it's all stuff we agree on. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I also want to ask, like, in everyone's eyes here, what went right with season 8 and what went wrong with it?
Hard to
I
pick out
think
what went wrong
there you go.
or right, honestly.
I think
Oh,
the
no.
MMR rebalancing went right. I think it's really helped out the lower tiers a lot. I mean, the problems kind of came back somewhat, but I mean, it's much better than if we'd left it untouched.
Yeah, I agree. For the lower level players, like the MMR distribution is definitely way better than what it was before.
Mhm.
But what I think what went kind of wrong with season 8 in a way is, well, the inflation near the end, obviously. Like,
Yeah.
I hate to sound arrogant and stuff, but there's definitely a few people who should not be at the rank that they're currently at.
Yeah.
That's like,
And, like,
I
guess
guess
it's a
since they haven't
natural
played as
thing.
much,
People
or
get people get burnt out, I guess. Yeah, honestly, I feel like the new queue system could definitely prevent that.
I also feel like this season kind of
Yeah.
went on for a bit longer than like it should have.
Yeah.
I generally think
I totally
that
agree.
ending the season right when a new DLC pack comes out is the play.
Woo! I actually really like some
Yeah.
of that.
I think I think what happened was last time the wave 4 came out quite soon after wave 3, if I remember correctly. Like it was a much smaller gap than the previous gaps.
Yeah, there's like a
So,
like pretty much
Mhm.
just 3 months.
But yeah, even then, it was still probably should have been done a bit earlier.
Yeah, I mean, hey, you live and learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Overall, I think the season was
Can
great
do.
though. Like
I think so too.
definitely one of the better ones.
Nice.
And you don't think anything went wrong with this season? Or things that you feel like you guys can improve on?
I think we've learned a lot from this season about like with the tickets and handling harassment and all those kind of cases, which we're reflecting on. There was definitely a lot of cases which were not handled well, or like we just kind of didn't really think about enough. But it's not like because I'm saying like people were wrong. It's just we're learning, and there's a lot of unique things that have came up. So
Mm-hmm.
in terms of that, there's definitely a lot of players who have came out with like bad experiences with the staff. But
Yeah.
I mean, we're I'm thinking going into the next season where we're making small rule changes to accommodate those kinds of things, and getting better, and like we're getting lots more stuff,
Sample
so
size is only
it's
going
always
up.
hard. Yeah, exactly.
Gotta work with what you
That's
got.
about it.
So you guys are pretty much just strengthening the security and the rules based around reporting and
I think it's more just like having precedents for previous cases, and understanding like what we've done before and how we can apply it to new cases.
okay.
What I really like too about the season process is like it's only like a certain amount of months in between seasons. So it's like if you guys ever think, I mean, obviously the new queue system is probably a couple seasons like away from now,
Yeah.
but it's stuff like that where it's like you can kind of like experiment, see what works, see what doesn't. Vantalk said this is one of the better seasons. I personally think like naturally things should only get better over time, but if you want to experiment with like implementing certain things, like what if you were to implement like, let's say every rank has like a 1 through 3 instead of just 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Like if you were to experiment with stuff
Yeah.
like that, like then you'd be able to figure out, like is it worth, diving more into that? Is it worth keeping? Is it worth getting rid of? Naturally when you only have like a couple months to really see how things go, when you put it like that, it's not like Lounge is just gonna like, it's not like Lounge is like just screwed forever if you make
Yeah,
like
I don't think so
one
either.
little change. And so it's like I feel like naturally every season's just gonna get a little bit better. And if it gets worse, it only means the following season is gonna be better than the season from 2 seasons ago, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's going to be improved on.
Yeah,
think,
and I think that's like the best thing you could do.
Yeah, I think once the solo queue system's implemented, and also a possible change for the MMR algorithm to take into account kind of the variance or certainty of a player's MMR, it should help a lot with making it much more fair and enjoyable experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be lovely. And I still want to squeeze a bit of information out. Are there any suggestions that you guys have implemented for season 9? In like suggestions log or whatever.
I can't say. I'm sorry, I don't have any. Here's
Fair
juicy
enough.
gossip for you. Sorry.
Yeah, there's an NDA here.
Yep, there we go.
Alright, well, we're
Yeah.
looking very forward to the new season. And I wonder,
100%.
from the way I see it, it's not really going to be anything new and big, but it's gonna be like Launch 8 V2, pretty much. With new rules and
Yeah.
such, and just an
Yeah,
improvement.
I'm picking up on that as well.
But nothing crazy. That's for maybe season 10.
I think that's accurate.
I also wonder, how far do you guys plan the season in advance? Like, is there already stuff planned for season 10 and season 11 and so on?
We have goals, like we about the stuff about the solo queue system and things, and like we know we want to try and get it in whatever the earliest season we can. So I mean, like if we can have it ready by season 10, obviously that'd be great. I mean, I also don't think there's a specific reason it would have to wait until a new season to implement. Like if we get it working halfway through season 9, I mean, there's a chance we could implement it halfway through. Don't quote me on that, but like I think the new season is less of, we shouldn't be delaying improvements just for new seasons. Like we used to do that a lot, but if we can do something early, like a rules change, I mean, we'll try and do it halfway through a season as well. As for this season, I mean, I think we've been talking about it for a month or so. Like we figured out the date a while back because it has to be at a good time that works for everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, right before MomoCon.
Yeah.
There you go.
No, but I'm probably gonna wrap it up here. And thank you so much for coming on the cast. It was great
No worries.
interviewing
Thanks for having
you.
me on.
Hell yeah, dude.
It was a good one. So yeah, thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for all the follows, the rate, the bits and such. And I will also upload this to the 10 Coins YouTube channel later on. Be sure to subscribe. I'll spam it in the chat again.
There we go. We
There
can
we
hear
go.
it too.